Ferrari now. 0345 6060 973 LBC.
It's time to get your
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
9 minutes before 8 is the time. We'll come back to our conversation about that public inquiry. Boris Johnson, and as I've already said, it makes sense to me. If you're in the middle of a war, you carry on fighting the war. You worry about the aftermath when you've hopefully had success. So let's beat the pandemic and then have the inquiry. But we'll take more of your views on that in just a moment. But this involves the Prime Minister too. He'll be taking part in a live classroom link-up with school children in Kenya. Why? To explain, Foreign Office Minister and obviously one of the Prime Minister's colleagues, Conservative MP James Cleverly, joins me now. OK, Mr Cleverly, why is the boss linking up with Kenya? Good morning.
Nick, good morning. The Prime Minister has always been a real passionate advocate for the liberating role of education, both here in the UK and globally. And this is an example to highlight the importance of education. So he and Julia Gillard will be going to school. They'll be linking up with...
That's the former Australian Prime Minister. Just to remind my listeners, it's just to tell them. Go ahead, James.
Sorry, apologies.
No, that's my job. That's my job. Go ahead. Yep.
And we'll be linking up with a school in Nairobi with Mr. Kenyatta, the Kenyan president, yep, to highlight this the importance of this. But we're also putting money behind this. We're allocating...
How much?
We're allocating a new commitment today of £55 million to support that. But in addition to that, we've already used our presidency of the G7 to get a commitment from some of the most affluent and successful economies in the world to support 40 million girls into education, 20 million additional girls reading by the age of 10. As the Prime Minister said, this is the Swiss Army knife of global problems. Educated women are good for the communities in which they live, and they are also good for the planet, and that's why we're doing this.
I hear you, but for the good folk of Braintree, I remind my listeners, of course, you are their representative in Parliament, when they say, James, or Mr Cleverly, why are we spending £55 million on schoolgirls in Kenya? What does that mean for the good folk of Essex? How would you respond?
Well, one of the things that we've seen, and we've seen it with the pandemic, we've also seen it with refugee crises around the world, instability in health, economic collapse in other parts of the world has a direct impact on us. And therefore, making sure that economies around the world are successful, making sure countries are stable and free from war, making sure that we have birth control. All these things matter, and they matter to us. They do matter to us indirectly.
But some would say, and I'm sure you through this long and hard, we have school children, particularly girls in this country, who could benefit from more help, who sadly through the pandemic, the best endeavours of the teachers have fallen behind. It's a fact of life. It was unavoidable, I sense. Why isn't the money going to them instead of girls in Kenya, Minister?
Well, the money is going to them, and I think we can be very proud of the support packages that we put in place through this pandemic. But we don't have the luxury. No country in the world has the luxury of just looking after its own. We live in a globally interconnected world, and it is in our interest, as well as the interest of the young people around the world, that we get this right. So we've got to do it all at once. Right. And it's not instead of, it's as well as.
Noting you're a Foreign Office Minister, Mr Cleverly, you'll know this question's coming your way. It looks horrific, the situation in Gaza. The President has spoken. I understand the Prime Minister has tweeted. A, can you give us an update? B, can you give us a sense of what the United Kingdom's trying to achieve here, Minister?
Yeah, Nick, the simple truth is that the images that we're seeing in both Israel and in Gaza are heartbreaking. We hear reports of fatalities, some of whom are children. We are working very, very hard, both directly with the government of Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and our friends and partners around the world.
What do you mean by that? When you say working hard, what does that actually entail day by day?
Well, at the moment, in the short term, it has involved an awful lot of phone calls, as I say, both to Israel, both to the Palestinian leadership as well, but also to countries that have a voice and have influence in the region. And that's including the US, European countries, but obviously countries neighbouring.
But surely it's Egypt we need to be, respectfully, it's Egypt we need to be making calls to, isn't it? They would seem to have the ear of both sides here, Mr Cleverly.
Well, I've spoken to the Egyptian ambassador, and we will continue to have conversations, as I say, with influential partners around the world and in the region. We need to bring this to a conclusion. We've called on Hamas to end the rocket fire, the indiscriminate rocket fire into Israel. Israel absolutely has the right to defend itself, but must do so in conformity with international humanitarian law. And we've called upon them to ensure they do everything they can to minimise civilian casualties in terms of their response.
Your colleague, Zach, now Lord Goldsmith, took down a tweet last night expressing support for Israel. It read as follows: "No country on earth would be expected to tolerate these incessant attacks on innocent civilians by an organisation committed to their total eradication. Why should Israel?" Was Lord Goldsmith right to delete that tweet, Minister?
Well, we've got to remember that the military wing of Hamas, which is firing these rockets, is a proscribed terrorist organisation in the UK. And these rockets, there is no legitimacy. There is no legitimate reason for these rockets to be fired. And we have demanded that they cease doing that. And as I say, we recognise that Israel has a legitimate right to defend itself, but must do so proportionately. But ultimately, what we need to see, and this is what we're focused on at the moment, is an end to the conflict. And everything that we are doing is focused on bringing this conflict to a conclusion.
Yes, my question was it right for Lord Goldsmith to delete the tweet, Mr Cleverly? That's a sort of yes or no, I said.
So that ultimately that's a decision for him. As I say,
would you have put that tweet out?
Well, my position on this I set out at the dispatch box at the House of Commons yesterday, which is that the rocket fire is illegitimate. Israel does have the right to defend itself, but must do so proportionately and minimising civilian casualties as it does so.
Couple of domestic matters. One newspaper today, The Sun, is very excited. As of June the 21st, masks in shops and offices will get the chop, i.e. we won't be required to wear face coverings. Is that true, Minister?
Well, you'll have to wait with bated breath to the
masked breath
about this. Yes, indeed. Look, ultimately, everybody wants to get back to normality in these abnormal times. But ultimately, the job of government is to make sure that we do that in a way that is safe to do so.
Right.
And so, therefore, I'm not going to speculate or comment about what.
But it is a possibility, at least.
Well, ultimately, we want to get, as I say, back to a situation where we can return to normality. And it may well be the case that, as we've seen in many parts of South Asia, for example, people derive a degree of confidence by continuing to wear masks because that's what they choose to do. So I don't know what announcements will happen. Ultimately, they'll be driven by the data, driven by the science to make sure that we can, as I say, get back to normality at a pace that is safe to do so.
What do you say to critics who say the public inquiry into the handling of COVID has been shelved and it shouldn't be? It should start straight away, not next year, Minister.
Well, the sad truth is that we're not out of the woods yet. I know we're feeling a degree of confidence because the vaccine rollout is great, and I hope that continues. In fact, I'm certain it will continue at a world-class pace. But ultimately, we have not yet fully defeated this virus. The timeline that we've set out with an inquiry starting in spring 22 gives us the time to properly defeat the virus so that we're not diverting attention, diverting resource, diverting time that should be focused on defeating the virus and getting back to normal.
Last but one. Why should we believe the Prime Minister on a timeline? Nearly 2 years ago, we had an oven-ready social care plan. It's not forthcoming. It's cost families £14 billion. That's cost families, elderly folk. Why the hell should I believe any timeline from the Prime Minister? He's incapable of delivery, isn't he?
Well, going back to the point that we've just discussed, we have had an unprecedented event, which has rightly demanded the time and the attention of governments across a range of departments. Now, we have committed to addressing this issue. We're looking to do that soon. The timeline, sadly, for a number of things in a number of countries around the world have been knocked because of our response to the pandemic.
But here's the thing, you can find 55 million quid for schoolgirls in Kenya, but you can't find money for elderly folk in England. It seems strange, doesn't it?
Well, the orders of magnitude, Nick, are really quite substantially different. And this is a really important issue. And as we've got a population which is, on average, getting older over time, this is something that we absolutely need to get right. We want to make sure it is politically sustainable as well as economically sustainable so that future governments don't feel the need to mess around with it for political advantage. So we need to make sure it's cross-party in its support as well.
Lastly, you had a bit of R&R, I understand, earlier this week, deservedly so. What was the best act you saw at the Brits, Minister?
Oh, they were all amazing. But
there must be one that stands out in your mind. As a TV viewer, I'm going to say I thought Sir Elton John, the duet, was quite extraordinary to witness, but I didn't have the privilege of being there. What would you say, Minister?
Yeah, so I was trying very, very hard to stay kind of cool and up to date. But I mean, the simple fact of the matter is Elton John is just a global class musical superstar. And maybe I'm showing my age, but I thought he was amazing. I mean, Dua Lipa was fantastic as well. But it was great to to be experimented upon because ultimately that event was an experiment in mass participation event. The music industry is an incredibly important British export, and something of which we can be greatly proud. And it was really great to see people.
Glad you enjoyed Dua Lipa's performance, and of course you subscribe to her view. Nurses get a pay rise, Minister.
Well, we've already committed to that, and we'll be listening to the advice of the pay review bodies in due course.
Have a good weekend. Thank you for your time. James Cleverly, Foreign Office Minister, appearing here on LBC, where the time is 2 minutes after 8 in the news with Simon Conway's next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Israeli forces have killed a number of senior Hamas figures as they step up airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. The country says it's in response to continued rocket fire into Israel by the Palestinian militant group. Since Monday, around 70 Palestinians and 7 Israelis are reported to have died in the fighting. Richard Pater, the director of the Britain-Israeli Communications